Today we're going to be talking about the Sigma FP and my initial thoughts on this camera. But before we get into it, if you're new to this channel, my name is Anson, and on this channel we talk about filmmaking gear, specifically gear for the budget-conscious filmmaker. So if that's you, consider subscribing. If you've been following the channel over the last few weeks, I've been testing out the Sigma FP for about the last 3 to 4 weeks, and I want to give you guys my first impressions on this camera. We're going to talk about some pros and cons. I'm going to start first with some of the pros. I have 3 things that I just love about this camera, starting first with the color science. One of the reasons I picked up the Sigma FP is because I can easily put this into a Blackmagic color space. Again, if you follow the channel, you know that my A camera primarily is the Pocket 4K. And so to easily be able to match up my footage between the Pocket 4K and the Sigma FP has been such an awesome benefit. Now, one thing that makes this possible is the fact that the Sigma FP does shoot in Cinema DNG RAW. Now, one negative that I've heard some people say is that it's not a compressed version of RAW, and so it will eat up your hard drive space, and that is very true. I've had really only like 3 or 4 good shoots out of this camera, and I've easily filled up a 1 terabyte SSD. Now, something I will be sharing with you eventually is my workflow for that Cinema DNG RAW, and a part of that is after I'm done with that footage, if I do want to store it long term, I convert it down to a ProRes, some flavor of ProRes, to make it a little bit lighter on my storage space so that I'm not just having to buy a whole bunch of external hard drives. But that being said, there's a huge selling point for me, the fact that I can very easily put this into a Blackmagic color space and easily make it match my Pocket 4K footage. Now, the other thing is the overall size of the camera. Even with it rigged out, it is considerably lighter and easier to carry around than the Pocket 4K rig that I have. Honestly, that's one thing Sigma has done a great job about marketing this camera, is it is the smallest full frame camera out there. And that leads me to my last pro, which is the fact that it is a low light beast. So the Sigma FP already has something going for it in the fact that it's a full frame camera. But another thing that makes this great for low light is the fact that when Sigma put out their version 2 firmware update, they made this camera have a dual native ISO. And so the native ISO on this camera is 100 and 3200. And so if I were to crank this up to 3200 ISO, it's gonna have a super clean image and I can kind of go from there. This is really gonna perform well in low light. And you guys know I love my low light shots, and so that is a huge bonus for me. Now, the cons that I personally find out of this camera, I really have like one big one and a couple of like smaller ones. And the couple of smaller ones are more like interface related. Like I found out today that you can't have zebras and also focus peaking at the same time. I don't know why you can't do those at the same time. The Pocket 4K does that. I'm not sure what's happening with the software there that it's not allowing you to do that. That was kind of like one of those things I found out today where I was just like, well, that's unfortunate. But the biggest con for me, and the reason why it is not currently my A camera, all comes down to IO. The IO options on this camera are very limited. I have a USB-C port. I have a micro HDMI port. I've never personally had a huge issue with micro HDMI, but I know it's basically like playing with fire, that the least little thing that happens to this and it's destroyed. Micro HDMI is not a great connection. Not a huge fan of that, but honestly, I don't know how they would fit a full HDMI on this camera, being that it's so small. But you do have a micro HDMI, and then you do also have a 3.5mm microphone jack, no headphone jack. That's one big thing that I don't want to use this as my A camera. Now, my monitor that I'm using does have a headphone jack on it, so I could potentially monitor it through that, but that bothers me that's not on the camera. So that's the big con for me, is the lack of options that you have when it comes to plugging things into the camera. So between the pros and cons, what are my overall thoughts and who would I recommend this camera to? My overall thoughts is for a camera that's under $2,000 that shoots RAW internally and is a full frame camera, I actually really think this is a good value. Now, you may hear some people hate on this camera, but I feel like the people that are giving negative feedback to this camera are people that are primarily shooting on prosumer cameras like the A7 III or the Canon EOS R or anything like that, that has that convenience factor. This doesn't have a ton of convenience. This reminds me a lot of the Pocket 4K or the original Pocket Cinema camera. They're not convenient cameras, but what it lacks in convenience, it makes up in overall picture quality. If you're a filmmaker looking for an amazing quality image, quality build, know that you're gonna give up the convenience factor but this is gonna be an amazing option to look at. I think for a camera that's sub $2,000, that's full frame and shoots raw cinema DNG, if you're looking for that type of performance, this is absolutely a camera to check out. So that's it for me. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, make sure to give it a like. If you're digging the overall content from the channel, consider subscribing. Thank you for joining. Go and find your journey. Go embrace life. Stay safe, be happy, support each other. Wash those hands, and I'll see you here next time. Peace.